It's the early 1990s in a marine biology lab on the coast of Italy. A young researcher named Christian Sommer is studying a tiny jellyfish, barely the size of a fingernail. He leaves a batch of them in a jar, distracted by other work. When he comes back, something is wrong. The jellyfish haven't died, they've gotten younger. That sentence sounds like a mistake, but it isn't. What Sommer had stumbled onto was a species now known as Turritopsis dohrnii, and it may be the closest thing nature has ever produced to biological immortality. To understand why this is strange, you have to understand what a normal jellyfish life looks like. It starts as a tiny larva, drifting through the water. It settles down and becomes a polyp, anchored to a rock or a reef. Eventually it buds off into the form most of us picture when we think jellyfish, the medusa, pulsing through open water. And then, like almost every living thing, it ages and it dies. Turritopsis doesn't follow that script. When it's injured, starved, or under serious environmental stress, instead of dying, its cells do something almost no other animal on Earth is known to do. They revert. Mature, specialized cells, the kind that are supposed to only move forward in development, turn back into an earlier, more flexible state. The jellyfish effectively collapses back into its polyp stage and starts its life cycle over again. Imagine a butterfly under stress turning back into a caterpillar, not once, but potentially over and over, indefinitely. The scientific name for this is transdifferentiation, and outside of this jellyfish, it's almost unheard of in the animal kingdom. Most cells, once they specialize into becoming a nerve cell, a muscle cell, a skin cell, don't get to go back. That's part of why aging happens at all. The specialized cells wear out, and there's no reset button. Turritopsis appears to have found one. Now, before this starts sounding like a loophole around death itself, it's worth being precise about what it isn't. This jellyfish is not invincible. It can still be eaten by a predator. It can still die of disease. What it resets is aging, biological senescence, not vulnerability. It's less immortal in the way we usually mean it, and more like a video game character that respawns instead of leveling up forever. It's also not the only creature that's found a workaround for death, just a strategy that's uniquely its own. Tardigrades, those microscopic, almost indestructible creatures you've probably seen in viral videos, survive extreme conditions through a completely different trick. Instead of reversing their age, they can shut down their metabolism almost entirely, entering a state called cryptobiosis, and simply wait out conditions that would kill nearly anything else. Extreme cold, dehydration, even the vacuum of space. Where Turritopsis rewinds the clock, tardigrades just stop the clock from running at all. What makes Turritopsis genuinely important, beyond the novelty, is what it might teach us about ourselves. Researchers studying its genome have been looking for clues about the genetic switches involved in cellular aging and regeneration. The same processes that, in humans, are tied to wound healing, tissue repair, and eventually the diseases of old age. No lab has managed to induce anything like full transdifferentiation in a complex organism like a mammal, and there's a good reason for that. Human cells are vastly more specialized and interconnected than a jellyfish's, which makes reversing them exponentially harder and potentially dangerous, since the same mechanism that could reverse aging is disturbingly close to the mechanism behind certain cancers. So here's where it leaves us. Christian Sommer didn't set out to discover anything close to immortality. He just left a jar of jellyfish sitting around too long and stumbled onto one of the strangest facts in modern biology. Somewhere in the ocean right now, there are animals quietly rewriting the rules of aging that the rest of life on Earth has always played by. We haven't figured out how to borrow that trick, but the fact that it exists at all, that biology has already solved the problem we're still trying to solve, might be the most interesting part of the whole story. Except it isn't the only one. Once you start looking, the ocean turns out to be full of creatures that seem to have quietly opted out of the aging process most animals are stuck with. Take the hydra, a freshwater relative of the jellyfish, just a few millimeters long. Scientists have kept individual hydra alive in laboratory conditions for decades, watching for any sign of age-related decline and finding essentially none. Its cells are in a constant state of renewal, replacing themselves so continuously that, biologically speaking, the hydra you're looking at today may share almost none of its original cells with the hydra it was months earlier, and yet it never seems to wear out. Then there's the naked mole rat, which by every normal rule of biology shouldn't exist the way it does. It's a rodent, roughly the size of a mouse, and mice tend to live 2 or 3 years. Naked mole rats can live past 30. They're remarkably resistant to cancer. They don't show the usual signs of aging, and their risk of dying doesn't increase with age the way it does in almost every other studied mammal, including us. For a long time, that made them a scientific curiosity. Now, they're one of the most closely studied animals in aging research, precisely because they seem to break a rule biologists assumed was universal. And then there's the Greenland shark, slow, unremarkable to look at, living in the cold depths of the North Atlantic, that researchers now believe can live for 3, maybe 400 years, based on radiocarbon dating of proteins in its eye lenses. A shark alive today could have been born before the United States existed. What ties all of these creatures together isn't a shared trick. Their mechanisms are all different. It's that each of them independently proves the same point. Aging, the thing that feels like an unavoidable law of biology, is actually more like a setting. Some species have it turned way up. Some have found ways to turn it almost all the way down. That's exactly why human researchers have gotten serious about studying them. One of the biggest breakthroughs in this field came from a completely different direction: the discovery of telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes, which shorten a little every time a cell divides. Once a telomere gets too short, the cell stops dividing altogether, and that process is now understood to be one of the central clocks behind human aging. In the 1980s, researchers including Elizabeth Blackburn discovered an enzyme called telomerase that can actually rebuild those caps, and cells that keep it switched on, like certain stem cells, can keep dividing far longer than ordinary cells can. That single discovery reframed the entire conversation. If aging is, at least partly, a countdown timer built into our own cells, then the question stops being, can this ever be changed, and starts being, how, and how safely? It's the same tension that shows up with the jellyfish. The very process that could reverse cellular aging is disturbingly close to the process that drives cancer, since cancer cells are, in a sense, cells that have already learned how to stop the clock and divide indefinitely. Every serious longevity researcher working today is essentially trying to walk that same narrow line, find a way to borrow immortality's trick without triggering its most dangerous side effect. That tension hasn't stopped people from trying. In the last several years, a handful of well-funded labs and biotech companies have started working on what's called partial cellular reprogramming, using a set of molecular tools first discovered by Shinya Yamanaka that can nudge an aged cell part of the way back toward a younger state without fully erasing its identity the way Turritopsis does. Early experiments in mice have shown signs of reversing some measurable markers of aging in specific tissues, though nothing close to what that jellyfish does to its entire body, and nothing yet proven safe or effective in humans, which leaves us with a strange kind of optimism. Nobody is promising human immortality, and anyone who does should probably not be trusted, but the outer edge of what's biologically possible has clearly moved. It moved because a distracted grad student forgot about a jar of jellyfish, and it's kept moving because researchers have been willing to take seriously creatures that don't play by the rules we assumed were fixed. The reason that matters isn't the fantasy of living forever, it's the much stranger, much more grounded fact that how long something gets to live was never as fixed a law of nature as it felt, somewhere between a jellyfish that rewinds its own age and a shark that was already old before your great-great-grandparents were born. The definition of what a lifespan even is starts to look a lot more negotiable than it used to.